Welcome, old viewers and new viewers, to another episode of the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA. This is the show where you learn all about conflict and its resolution strategies, the what, the why, the where, the when, the who. Evidence-based frameworks are introduced as they are salient to conflict resolution. I like to introduce some of my original mnemonics, like the 5A of conflict resolution. Now, the third Friday of each month is reserved for story time. And story time is basically an analysis of a movie, drama, an event of what went wrong or what could have been done differently. The last Friday of each month is reserved to have a guest. And this guest might be an expert in conflict resolution or might have something salient and of value to share as it pertains to that theme of the month or that particular topic of the episode. So welcome to the month of June. In this month, we are going to be talking all about spirituality, ethical dilemmas as it pertains to conflict in healthcare. So today's specific episode is titled Spirituality and Ethics in Healthcare with focus on conflict and mandates. So with not much ado, I hope you're relaxed, sit back and enjoy, okay? So one thing I would like to mention, though, I would like to preface this episode and subsequent episodes for the rest of this month by saying this, that a valuable and a wise trait of a leader, consultant, and a coach is to employ critical thinking and evoke critical thinking for employees, clients, and participants. So keeping that in mind, that's the approach I'm going to take as we discuss this episode and as we go through various topics. So today, like I mentioned, the focus is going to be on mandates, and I'm going to share my screen and specifically the particular policy, if you will, about mandates that I want to talk about is all about the vaccine, okay? So I hope you can see my screen there. Just going to enlarge it. And when I talk about the vaccine, first and foremost, before we talk about that, we're going to talk a little bit more about the picture as I pull up my, sorry about that. Let me just pull up my pointer right here, this picture right here. So obviously on the screen, you see people are masked, but also what do you see? You see they're spaced as they're standing in line, spaced away from each other. Now, you might have heard the term physical distancing versus social distancing. Sometimes you heard things like, oh, social distancing within 6 feet or however parameters was measured, right? However, was that the appropriate terminology to use? From this picture, what we see are people who are physically distantly spaced from each other. So physical distancing would be appropriate. So why am I pointing this out? I'm pointing this out because when we use the word social distancing without understanding the meaning of it, using it synonymously as physical distancing, that can create problems. So for example, in the world, when we're going through the high climate of the pandemic, people were asked to socially distance. And what did that mean? When they meant physical distance, they said social distancing. But when you talk about the term social, that means staying away from each other, meeting face to face was not recommended. But from a social perspective, what did that do to friendships and relationships? Those were compromised. So for some people, relationships were lost, ended. For some, new friendships were forged. So again, language is very important in messaging as to what we're trying to get across. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and talk a little bit more now about the vaccine. So we're talking about spirituality here, and specifically, I want to focus on the codes of ethics, and I'll talk to you shortly about that. Why am I talking about this? How many of you have heard the third terminology, conscientious objection or conscientious objector? If you have, you might know this or you may not know this. It became popularly known or used based on an individual by the name of Muhammad Ali. He was an American boxer who, based on my understanding, for religious purposes, chose not to go to war because of his religious beliefs rather. So for this episode, when we talk about spirituality, I understand there's a difference. Some might say there's a difference between spirituality and religion. And the biggest difference some might use is religion has to do with organized rules, code of conduct for a group of people, where spirituality can be individualized. It's much more than having a higher power. It's about transcending. So for the purpose of today, I will use it interchangeably as religion. However, the caveat I want to make is this. Just because you define yourself under the umbrella of a particular religion does not mean that two individuals with the same quote unquote religion have the same mindsets when it comes to different values. So as an example, with a mandate, two people of the same faith may have different views about the mandates. One might be for it and the other might be against it, but they still have the same religion governing them. But what's the difference? Their conscience is different. So for some people, it's their personal conviction, but in spirituality / religion, it's their conscience. For some, they might call it the Holy Spirit guiding them to make a particular decision. So today's episode is focused on the individuals who, for some religious purposes, or individual in terms of conscience, decided not to partake of the vaccine. So, conscientious objection. My background is healthcare. My foundation is nursing. So I'm most familiar out of all the code of ethics out there, documents, I'm most familiar with that of nursing. So that's the one we're going to visit and explore today, and specifically is the Canadian Nurses Association Code of Ethics for Registered Nurses 2017. So I'm going to share my screen to walk you through some points I'd like us to highlight and why. Again, we're linking an individual who has a spiritual / religion conviction not to partake of the mandate. We want to see how the Code of Ethics addresses this decision in terms of how the individual is to act, how their supervisors and organization are to act, and so on, okay? So here we go as I share my screen. Stay with me, okay. So here we go. So I'm gonna walk you through, I hope you can see that. So I'm gonna walk you through, so page 35 of this PDF document. This is a code of ethics, by the way, nursing code of ethics. So this page 35 talks about what the ethical considerations one needs to employ as it pertains to one's conscience, okay? And here's that word, conscientious objection, right here in bolded, okay? Based on the description I gave you. Now, when we go down, the key is if you have an objection, if you have a conflict related to a matter of conscience, you should alert your employers quickly so a substitute can be provided. The key is this: you must not abandon or jeopardize care of your clients. Now, understandably, nurses work in different roles and settings. Some work at the front line, some work in administration, research, education. So whatever setting you find yourself, if it's administrator, you don't have quote unquote patients or clients, but you need to let your supervisor know that so that whatever work you have to do doesn't jeopardize the workflow or the operations of the organizations or individuals you're partnering with. The same is true for education. If you're teaching students, talk to your supervisor so the substitute teacher can be provided. Instructor can be provided for the students, our learners, and so on and so forth. So now let's go to page 36. Why am I highlighting this? Now, some individuals who chose not to get the vaccine based on religious, or you could say spiritual convictions, we sadly know some of them were put on leave of absence without pay. And some of them, eventually, some of them were asked to come back to resume their work. However, some might have decided to move on. So one thing I want to point out here is this, that for individuals who will be seeking employment moving forward. Now, remember, this code of ethics has been in place since 2017. Nothing has changed during the pandemic, according to my knowledge. Nothing was revised during the pandemic for this code of ethics. So for individuals seeking employment, before you seek employment and you feel this is a place you really want to work, I highly recommend you do your research. Talk to senior leaders if you can. Talk to the employees of that organization. Be very clear what conscientious objections you might have based on the setting of wherever it is you're applying or applying. Be very clear and bring that up. I would say if you're invited to an interview, ask those questions. And even better, when you ask questions, don't just ask, do you do so and so? Will I be required to do so and so? But a better question would be, what is your strategic mission or vision for the next 2 years or 3 years or 5 years? Or what's your strategic vision right now? That will help you plan to see, is this a place I would even remain long-term based on what you're doing? And I hope they'll be transparent with you and honest with you to clear the air as it pertains to matters of conflict of conscience. As an example, I applied for a position, got an interview. They were very ready to have me hired, but I was thinking about a conflict of conscience issue. I raised it, the individual avoided it. At the end of the interview, the individual seemed happy that, oh, I'll be a good fit. But I said, my concern is this: I will leave this interview not knowing what your stance is on this issue. And that particular issue was medical assistance in dying. And then the individual's response was, oh, we do it, but there are ways to work around it. So with that information, I need to decide, is it somewhere I need to work in? I can work in. So at least they told me right then and there. So I say the same to you, I advise you to ask questions. Now, scrolling down, I'm going to stop sharing my screen shortly, but scrolling down, I want to point out something to you. So I highly invite you to read all these steps. But one other thing I want to point your attention to is this item here, 5. It says that individuals who, I'm going to paraphrase, but right here you can see the second 2 lines here. An individual who declares a conflict of conscience should receive fair treatment and should not experience discrimination. So let me start from the beginning. Employers and co-workers are responsible for ensuring that nurses and co-workers who declare a conflict of conscience receive fair treatment and do not experience discrimination. And the next point says nurses need to be aware that declaring a conflict of conscience may not protect them against formal or informal penalty. Okay, let me stop sharing my screen and let's delve right into this. So employers and co-workers need to ensure that an individual declaring a conflict of conscience should not experience discrimination or unfair treatment. Here's my question to you. The individuals who were conscientious objectors, did they receive fair treatment? And another clause in that code of ethics says if there is a conflict of interest, the employer should accommodate that individual. So back to the mandate. Did these individuals, were they accommodated appropriately? And so what would that look like? So that could be either, if they were working at the front lines, maybe they could work in a setting where they can work behind the scenes, given different duties, but not putting them on leave of absence based on their decision. For another a group of people, it could basically mean working virtually, okay? It could also be rapid antigen testing, maybe every 2 days or every 3 days, whatever the frequency, but where those individuals accommodated. Now, it also says they should not be discriminated against. Now, discrimination comes in different forms. Discrimination is one of the protected grounds according to the human rights, okay? Now, I'll say Alberta Human Rights Commission. Now, discrimination comes in different forms. What about individuals, both known to us and unknown to us, who were accommodated? Why were some selected and others not selected? Would that not be a form of discrimination? I would say it is, okay? What criteria was used to determine whose will be granted, whose application will be granted and others? Why did medical exemption trump religious exemption? Okay, so these are questions that go through my mind. Now, one might say, hang on, we were in a pandemic. We need to save lives, protect clients. I absolutely agree with that. These individuals who, for whatever reason, stood their ground. Some of them are not opposed to vaccinations. They were just not comfortable based on their conscious leading to get a specific group of vaccinations. They heard the repercussions. They suffered the repercussions. And some that when they were asked to return still maintained their stance. Now, that is what one would call someone who has strong moral principles. And not just that. There's a word, actually, let me find that phrase for you, basically say that in spite of threats and repercussions, they still stand firm to their decisions. I will venture and be bold to say, those are the kind of people I want on my team. Why? Because let me just pause there for a second and clarify something. When I say those are the type of people I want on my team, I'm not saying whether you're vaccinated or not vaccinated. That's not the question. That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point I'm trying to make is someone who strongly believes in something, stands firm no matter what is thrown at them. These are people who are firm and that are reliable, in my humble opinion. It's not to say that the other group of people who are vaccinated are not reliable. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that these individuals have proven what material they're made of. I mean, think about it. When you think about different materials, you have silk, denim, lace. So these individuals I liken to those of denim quality. You know, that hard, strong, durable. Yeah, that's kind of what I liken them to. Now, going back to what I started saying, but I didn't finish. Some might say, wait a minute, we're in a pandemic. Aren't we obligated to protect the public? Absolutely. Absolutely. Maybe we should protect the individuals who chose to abide by a policy, and those who chose not to, well, they can suffer the effects. Well, we can't help it. This is an emergency. That raises an ethical dilemma of a question of a philosophy called utilitarian. It's a hard, long word for me. Utilitarianism. There we go. Now, what does this philosophy say? So basically the premises is right or wrong is based on an outcome. Do or a decision is made based on the greatest number of good. So some might say that was an ethical philosophy in play. But honestly, I don't recall, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I don't recall ever hearing any ethical principles brought up in the whole discussion. I heard legal, but I didn't hear anything ethical. Ethical should not be relegated. It did not become obsolete. I'm quoting documents here. So a classic example we use for utilitarianism, I remember in my ethics class years ago, was, imagine this, a family is in a war-torn zone, okay? And they happen to have a baby, and the military people are looking for them. And this baby starts crying. The question is, what should be done? That baby is gonna alert the military people or whoever is after them to the family. And once they find the family, chances are they're gonna be all killed. Utilitarianism says, try and get that baby to stop crying. If it doesn't, if you were to kill that baby, that's justified. Why? Because one life is sacrificed and the rest of the family is saved. I do not agree with that school of thought, but that is one of the schools of thought out there in terms of ethics, right? Now, going back to the code of ethics again, it governs decision-making, not just between nurses and your patients/clients. It governs how employers relate to their employees. It governs how employees relate to each other, okay? So I asked the question, in all of this that was happening, sadly, for individuals who were not accommodated, it became a situation of we have to agree to disagree. Now, in that code of ethics, I mentioned that, or I highlighted it, where it said that the individual might experience a penalty, either formal or informal, as it pertains to their conscientious objective stance. I invite policy reviewers, code of ethics creators to review that particular item and the word penalty there. Does it need to be explored and defined given what we have experienced? When I say we, with the pandemic and the ramifications, does that word needs to be revisited to either be specific what that means? Because above that, it says the individual needs to be accommodated. It says the individual should not experience unfair treatment and to be discriminated and should not be discriminated against. So why was one done and the other's not done? So I'm still trying to wrap my head around that. Like I really want to, and well, I welcome any answers people might have about this. Okay. So support. Where was the support for these individuals that experience hardships as a result of being put on leave of absence? Their source of income was cut off. Where was the support for these individuals? Support in the sense of financially, socially, spiritually, culturally. Did employers provide debriefing sessions for them? Yes, I understand that some employers, organizations have unions, and the unions may take that role. But what about the individuals that didn't have unions? What was done for those employees? Where was the support from the regulatory bodies? So as an example, I just shared the code of ethics with you. Where was the support for their members? And again, the same principle of what I'm asking applies to other industries. Sorry, other industries, yes, but also other disciplines other than nursing, okay? I'm just using nursing as the reference point here. But where was the support from their regulatory bodies? Where was the support from Alberta Human Rights Commission? When I look at the documents, unless something has changed, that didn't become obsolete in terms of discrimination and religion being a protected grounds. That didn't change during the pandemic, but where was the support for individuals that fall into that criterion? What about the employers? Like I'd mentioned that. Even when the individuals came back to work, was there a debriefing session? How were they cared for? Or was it just swept under the carpets? Could something be done differently? I know time has passed, but better late than never. I value a leader who admits mistakes. Why? Because it adheres into them. It fosters respect, trust, and credibility. So some might say there was no mistake, we were just going by policies from higher up. Okay, maybe you were, but where did it say you needed to breach ethical principles of doing no harm? You might say, how did we do harm? Well, their income were compromised. Their mental health was compromised. That is harm. And again, it wasn't just an acute harm. This is traumatic that will linger for a period of time. How are you addressing those needs? Okay, so maybe counseling was provided in terms of extra benefits and insurance. But what about conversations? Was an actual in-service done as a group for both vaccinated and unvaccinated? How is the organization culture right now that people are back? I hope better. I sincerely hope better. Okay. So when I talk about an individual that stands firm and resolute, the phrase that escaped me at the time is called moral courage. They have moral courage. Okay. So now I would like to invite you for a call to action, like I usually do for each episode. I'd like you to reflect and act. So the first question is this: are you familiar with your profession's code of ethics? especially as it pertains to conscientious objection. Do you know how to access your profession's code of ethics, be it in hard copy or electronically? The call to action is to look it up. The other call to action is this. Listening to me right now or later on the replay, what is the one thing that stood out to you? And what will you do about it? Now, before we draw to an end, I'd like to invite you, I'm going to share my screen here. I'd like you to invite you to visit my website. Why? The reason why I'd like to invite you to visit my website is this, to give you an idea of the kind of services, I'm going to share my screen here, the kind of services that I provide. And I'm going to tailor some of them specifically to the topic at hand today. So what specific, sorry, we're going to quickly, there we go. Specific topic at hand. So far I talked about code of ethics and I talked about debriefing. So here, code of ethics. So under the policy and governance material reviews, I am a healthcare administration consultant. And this, as you can see, are the administrative services that I offer. So when it comes to reviewing of policies and governance issues or materials, that is one of the services that I offer. And you can find more about my services on my website, which is shalomeagleswings.care. You can also email me at cheryl@shalomeagleswings.care. Why care? Because I care. Now, change management is another one I want to highlight. If you remember, I asked earlier on, what, in an indirect way, I asked about what debriefing was done for individuals affected by the mandates. Adversely, I should use the word adversely affected. Now, change management is all about, and I'm just going to briefly say what it's all about. It's all about how do you prepare your employees, and I'll stop sharing my screen. How do you prepare your employees before a major change is about to happen? Some of this could be as simple as, let's have an in-service. Let's have an education service session. Let's have correspondence, memos, emails, open door policy for an actual discussion. Sometimes it could be for consultation, but sometimes it might be, this is for you just to know, for your information. But either way, I can help you and your organization for change management before a change happens and afterwards and during the implementation. So before, during, and after for follow-up. That is an example of some of the services that I offer, okay? So I invite you to join me next time for another episode of the Dancing Negotiator with Dr. Cheryl Okoli, DHA, same place, same time, okay? And we'll continue our series of spirituality and healthcare and complex situations. Next week, we will be focusing on medical assistance in dying. But before you leave, I always like to leave you with this thought. Remember that you are needed in this world to be a solution. Be the best that you can, and do not rob the world of a precious gem, you. Goodbye and have a splendid day.